All right, we might kick it off. We'll allow other people to roll on in as they join us. But wanted to thank everyone for tuning in and joining us for this session today. My name is Lauren Kaplan. I'm calling in from the land of the Gubbi Gubbi people up in Queensland, and want to pay my respects to the traditional owners, past and present, of the lands on which we're all joining this call today, obviously from all around Australia. And it's really exciting for me to be able to co-present this session with Ash Brown, the founder of Empiraa. Really what we were wanting to do, getting everybody to have a fast start to the year to make sure that, the January, February, March period wasn't super slow and frustrating, which can so often be the case in Australia, really making sure that the startup community has all the tools they need to succeed as early as possible in the year, and to provide you with some great key takeaways, things to keep in mind as you build your business, and obviously moving from that 0 to 1 phase. So in my role at AWS, I am the ecosystem support manager for AWS startups. That basically gives me the opportunity to work at the coalface of the startup ecosystem across Australia and New Zealand, and work with organizations like co-working spaces, industry groups like Startup Victoria, and obviously startups like Empiraa, who are servicing and supporting the early stage startups themselves. Prior to my role at AWS, I was at StartMate for 2 years, overseeing a couple of the cohorts of the StartMate Accelerator program, so speaking to thousands of startups over the last couple of years as well. And my background before that is in venture capital across the fintech ecosystem, as well as the sharing economy even before that. So have seen a lot of startups go from 0 to 1 and much further beyond that, and keen to share some of the insights that I've seen, but also to lean on Ash, who's driving the conversation today from his perspective at Empiraa, making sure that that all the startups out there are getting their best foot forward in terms of planning. So over to you, Ash, to introduce yourself.
No worries, thanks for that, Lauren. And firstly, it's awesome to have Lauren on board and support what we're doing here in Empiraa. I started my journey 2.5 years ago at Empiraa, working. Before that, I was working as a SME leader, a sales manager, general manager within various businesses like Taxi Box, Jumbo Corp, 1300 10 Fence. And I really just found it just a niche that needed to be filled. And it was like planning for businesses. There was so many tools out there, and like spreadsheets and Sana and that, and it just wasn't getting, wasn't enabling businesses to act the way they needed to act to get basically stuff done. And the more I worked in getting the solution, which was Empiraa, the more I realized that, geez, we actually really need this. And then the more I started speaking to people like founders through the Hyper program, which I went through, the Hyper Acceleration program during COVID, which we talked about COVID earlier, which was brilliant because it gave me the time to work on Empiraa through that time in a really easy, smooth way to transition from being in a full-time C-level role into what I'm doing now. And we've been able to raise around about $1 million. We've launched our products. We're in 8 countries. We've got over 250 companies on the platform. We're really heavily focused with startups by partnering up with the AWS, Startup Victoria, Hyper. Potentially there's a few others which I won't name just yet, but there's some really cool partnerships that are about to happen. And then also SMBs, and why SMBs and startups have really joined us and turned around and gone, well, actually, yeah, you've got something. It's because we've been able to simplify business planning and execution. And this is probably a really good lesson for a lot of founders, especially first-time founders, or when you're starting that journey, is when we started, we were all really heavily focused on, we're a strategy platform. We're a strategy platform, we're a strategy platform. And then once we realized our market, we went, actually, no, we help businesses game plan for the future. And that's what we'll talk about here, just how we help you game plan for the future, but using that simple strategic framework to do so. So it really, the big lesson there is don't be scared to pivot. That's probably where I'll go there. So now from here, we've got a poll. We're really interested to find out what you're currently using to plan. So there's choices at the moment is Asana, Monday.com, Notion, Word Docs, and well, I just don't have one, which hopefully the last one's not there. But the reason why we want to talk about those particular products is because during our market research, we found that they're the products that people use. Asana, Monday.com, Notion. Notion's heavily used, as well as PowerPoints and presentations, and Word docs. What have you traditionally used in the past, Lauren?
I have been a bit of a scratch pad girl, so I like to just jot things down on a piece of paper, but over time I've evolved that somewhat to using things like Notion and Asana. But I think, as we'll obviously get into today, that each of those systems has kind of benefits and flaws depending on how you spend your time, and how you actually then utilize that document going forward. So it's a really interesting question to ask.
Yeah, just really want to know and get under the hood and see what's going on out there in the real world.
It's probably also worth mentioning, obviously, that as much as we wanted to kind of have the session and share a few things with all of you, we would really love to be able to answer some questions as you're going along. So please use the Q&A function to tell us where you're at in your journey, what it is that you're struggling with as you think about your own business plan, or even before the business plan, like how are you articulating your vision and mission and things like that. So do use the Q&A function. We'll keep interacting with it through the session, and hopefully have some time for your questions either throughout or at the end as well.
Yeah, definitely fire everything at us. We've seen a bit, but I want to hear. Like I said, I actually really want to hear also too what you're doing. That's really cool. I love hearing people with the entrepreneurial spirit that's out there. So,
all right, should we close this poll off?
Yeah, let's go.
Get the results.
So where's the poll? We've got a producer in the background, Ash, who's not me. It's another Ash. We're very diverse here. We've got two Ashes. So yeah, Ash is building that out as we speak.
All right. What are the results?
Overwhelming majority is Word doc and PowerPoint and spreadsheet, 58%. 8% say they don't have a plan. So hopefully by the end of this, you might actually have a plan. So that'd be good. 25% say Notion and 8% say Asana. So the big one there, Lauren, is in this really
the
sort of will lean into what we're going into today.
Does that surprise you, Ash?
No, it doesn't. I think we were discussing the other day, we were at the Startup Bootcamp event in Melbourne, and through just talking to founders, we had conversations with founders that we built out 40-page business plans. It's like, yes, it's great, but it's not actionable, and that's what we'll talk about later on. So I'm not surprised.
No, that feels like it's been the default choice, but hopefully we can kind of give people some more flexible ways to think about it from this session. Yeah,
exactly. So probably the big one there, Lauren, is why does planning matter? And why in your time between AWS, the VC world and startup, what have you noticed the really good startups do in the way of planning, and why does it matter so much?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and the planning piece speaks to both the clarity of the vision and the mission, but also it speaks to how you can actually measure success along the way. So the best startups that we see are able to articulate their vision in a way that is actionable. They're able to look at that future point on the horizon, but make it not just a lofty goal, something that sounds nice. Maybe it is big, hairy, and audacious, but there's no practical steps to go from the current state to where you are. It's so uncommon for a founder to be able to build a business from day one that looks like the direction that they're heading in. So what I love to see is founders who can articulate that vision, but actually unpack that and start something that is, the first step, the first practical step towards that. And it matters for so many different reasons, whether that's, how you engage other people along the journey with you, whether you know how to evaluate your success along the way, and also, obviously getting the buy-in of investors and other people along the way as well. So that's definitely, the crux of planning for me speaks to those points.
Yeah, and probably sort of, leveraging into that what you were just saying is, for me, like the planning, there's an old saying where an idea without a plan is a dream, and when you could easily in this space, in the startup space, be stuck in the dreamy, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but without a sort of a plan, you sort of don't get anywhere. And I was talking to someone just previously today about if you're climbing Mount Everest and various other things, that you've got to have a plan. And if you're going to tackle these things, you sort of really need to plan and keep it realistic, but also have that, like I said, the big, hairy, audacious goal in front of you. And that's the biggest reason why I founded Empiraa in 2020 was I sat there in meetings, and this is not just an exclusive startup problem. This is like across all sort of sectors of business, that every time we would talk about plans, we would talk about it and we'd build something out, as we just found out, spreadsheets and PowerPoints, but we never actually actioned anything, or we actioned very little. And it was just so much intellectual property and inefficiencies within the businesses that are just the poor planning drives that. So it was, it really does matter. And I think probably one of the things that I noticed, it's like, when people talk about like staff turnover and why people leave in that, and why certain things happen. And you look back and go, well, actually, if we plan correctly, if we planned an onboarding plan, or if we plan the right roles, then you don't have those, inefficiencies. And so, yeah, to me, it's just vital. It's absolutely vital.
I think the other aspect to this, which is important to note before we get into the kind of crux of, what does all this look like, is with that lofty plan, you've got that sense of where you're going, but if you don't actually then work backwards to those immediate first steps, not only do you not know which first step to take, but you can actually find yourself expending far too much energy in those early stages. And it's so common for a startup to, this mantra of bias to action is obviously something that we hear a lot across the startup ecosystem, which is valuable. But if you aren't sure what to action, obviously you can spend your time doing many things without any of them yielding a result. So perhaps we should dive into the kind of the key differences here.
Yep. So we're going to highlight the 4 common problems for starters, for found-ups starting out. So for us, we've had a conversation, we looked at it and went, what are the 4 real issues when you're building out a plan at this early stage, especially, and we just found out that 58% of you are using static plans, which is fantastic for this actual conversation, because it actually circled back perfectly. But you'll see there's a difference between a static business plan, which is the box with just a line, and an actual business plan that's very, very fluid and very dynamic. And I know it looks like one of those ink blot stains, or one of those things that the psychologists put you through. But that's
the Rorschach test.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, but that's basically business planning. That to a T, like really good business planning is dynamic. It's a living, breathing organism, and you can sort of tell that from there. It takes you along the journey, and it starts evolving with your business. We discussed the other day about it being a GPS versus a Melways, and everyone used the Melways or the Sidways or the Brisways or whatever it was. If you're Australia based, if you're not, then I think I saw someone from Montreal, so sorry about that. But it's if you use a static map, you're looking at it, you go, I want to go from there to there. You know nothing about traffic conditions, know nothing about anything that's going on. You're looking at something and going from there to there. And having something that's dynamic will allow you to course correct, make decisions, avoid issues, and make smarter decisions and save you time and efficiency. That's the real difference there between dynamic and static. And I think business plans should not be static, because business isn't. So
I think the other reason to think about your business planning cycle and move it into a more dynamic state, of course, is that so many founders, when they are taking those first steps, that business plan is perhaps the first thing they think about doing. But the reality is that it then becomes a focus in and of itself to create the perfect business plan, or to create the complete business plan. I've got to fill out every single page of this document, or every single field of the questions that I'm being asked about my marketing plan and my resourcing and my budget. And the reality is that not any of those, hardly any of those things will actually be able to be completed for a startup. It might be the case for a more traditional business that has predictable inputs and output metrics. But for most of you on the call here, you're working in a completely new space, you may have an idea of where you're trying to get to, but the pathway in between now and there is a lot more ambiguous. So the more you spend time perfecting that business plan, the more likely that business plan is to be completely wrong, in a very short space of time. So here, what we're trying to get at is, what is the bare minimum of an architecture or a framework that will help you get to that end point, and how can you use this document or this plan to continue to sense check the direction that you're heading. As Ash said, you might be looking at the Refidex, but of course the traffic's changed and there's a traffic jam, so you need to be able to veer left or right to go around that traffic. And a good business plan will actually give you the right insights and the kind of values and compass points to be able to navigate around those roadblocks as they come up.
And then probably the other one, just to quickly jump on that point, is also it's a lot easier to bring people along the journey on a more sort of dynamic, smaller plan than to sit down and go, well, this is my 40-page document, a War and Peace document that I wrote, and people are going, oh, it's pretty complex. I'm not sure I'm going to read all that. So to have something dynamic that can hit those points, you're 100% right. And by the way, when I first started doing going through my Empiraa journey, if I look at the plans that I had then and how detailed and how incredibly lofty they were versus what I run with now as a functioning business, vastly different.
Yeah, and perhaps the kind of closing point there is, like, how much is enough of a business plan to start with? I think if you consider, as a founder, you have all of these visions, dreams, goals in your head. The kind of right level of a business plan is take whatever's in your head and put it down somewhere, and use a format that's going to enable you to reorganize your thoughts, to simplify your thoughts, to realize, is this a goal, or is this, a nice to have, point on the horizon? Is this a metric that matters, or is it a vanity kind of exercise that will make me feel good but won't actually move the needle where it matters? So use this dynamic business plan to extract all the information from your head, put it down on some kind of format, and then be able to move around and adjust it over time, delete things, add things as they come up as well.
Don't be a scribbler.
Get it off pen and paper eventually, maybe.
Yeah.
Otherwise you'll lose your notebook.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. No, all right. So point 2 is, how do you know you're focusing on the right things? So how are you prioritizing your big rocks that point to your North Star? Referring back to your values framework and thinking about what generates value. So Lauren, it'd be awesome to get your point of view on this.
Yeah, so I just wanted to reflect on, I guess, my time at StartMate in particular, because, in a context like an accelerator, any accelerator, or any sort of time-bound situation for your business, you have, a compacted time period where you're trying to maximize the output or the impact that you can have. So when companies came through the StartMate Accelerator, at the very beginning of that 3-month process, we would ask them to distill their 3 goals for the business, but also to articulate at that point, what is that ambitious North Star they're heading towards? And the importance of both of those things is really key, because without the North Star, any 3 goals can sound great, but you could get to the end of that accelerator period and realize that none of them were actually going to make a meaningful difference to the trajectory of your business. But then, of course, the big North Star, without any of those concrete goals, can see you running around chasing mice, can see you pursuing the wrong goals, or, optimizing for and investing in things that are actually not going to move that needle. So it is this balance between the two. But the most important part of both of them, of course, is that they are actionable in some way, that you can measure a sense of progress off the back of them, and that your kind of 3 big goals really do add up to a point in the future where you're going to be one step closer to achieving your North Star goal as well.
Yeah, no, and that's where having sort of your vision and values in your face effectively makes a difference. To understand why you're doing what you're doing, and the vision of what you want that business to be. So that North Star is super important, especially with the valuations fluctuating up and down, and a bit of a shift in just investability of startups. where previously they were focusing on, just grow the business at any cost versus, well, actually let's create profitable startups or like a road to profitability. And I think I think planning and focusing on those things are vital for a start, especially early stage, to have that discipline and those values.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the key there around the values, of course, is that we so often see values used as a nice to have at the point when you've got 10 plus staff and you want to give everybody some feel good words to rally around. But the reality is the values should almost be imbued in the business from the get-go if you're going to scale the business in the right way. And what they are there for isn't just to make everyone feel good, and they're not exclusively about the culture of the business you're creating. What they're there for are decision-making principles that you can actually look to and make trade-offs on the basis of. So definitely, even if it's just yourself creating the North Star, creating these goals and looking at the values, think about how you want to codify how decisions should be made about your business in the future and how those priorities should be weighed off against. And if you want a good resource to look to on this front, I mean, Amazon itself has had what they call leadership principles that have governed the success of the business, since the earliest days of the .com era. And I think the fact that they've been able to be robust and stood the test of time, and that new employees come in, embody those leadership principles, and are then empowered to make decisions off that basis, that's an incredibly powerful way to think about goals and the values as they relate to those goals.
Yeah, and I mean we've got like internally from day one, I had core values. Keep it simple, hardworking, but not hardworking like in a bad way. Like we're going to work hard, be the hardest worker in the room. Those type of goals, and what we've found is by having myself having those values from day one, I was able to attract talent that had those values, the missionaries versus the mercenaries. And what I was finding was by doing that, I was actually attracting really intelligent, scrappy, resourceful people like myself. Not saying I'm intelligent, but those sort of people that come in and that sort of embody the Empiraa spirit. And as you're growing a startup, that's really, really important. I was listening to how I built this, and the Atlassian boys were talking about their first 11 hires versus their next 30 hires, and the first 11 hires really reflected their personality and their values. But then the next 30 hires, they hired a HR manager that didn't reflect those values. And those next 30 to 40 hires are no longer with the company because they didn't reflect, they didn't stand out in the same value set, so it's really, really, it's surprising how valuable it actually is. But it's absolutely vital. Ash is about to show us how it actually, on our screen on Empiraa, you'll be able to see here, this is one of the things that, this is dynamic versus static. Because vision statements and also your values change, in our platform, in the Empiraa platform, you're able to evolve those as you go along, versus just saying, okay, well, we're just going to be awesome, we're going to aim high and whatever else. As your business grows, and it will, because you're planning, you're doing everything right, that your values will fundamentally shift from time to time, and so will your vision. So, and be able to have your pillars of what you're trying to do for your business, but also your core values and your vision statement all tied into this one document in a really simple, succinct way. I think it really helps you sort of continually understand and have those values sitting in your face, rather than sort of having values sitting on a website or on a front desk in a catalog that have got gathered dust, which we've all seen before. So yeah, and also too, to be able to communicate that to your team, which is really, really good. Like, I mean, it just is an example of just how Empiraa will roll out your values, but then roll out an objective around those values. And this is like the cost funding and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's really a simple way of planning and keeping that on track.
So perhaps as you're in that process of, determining what your values might be and fleshing out what those initial kind of big rocks will be, I think it's always good to sense check between, does this big rock give meaningful progress towards that North Star? And do these values enable me to make decisions and trade-offs between, one big rock and another, or between the priorities that fall out of that kind of big planning rock? And this quote here on the screen is just a little takeaway from the book Measure What Matters, from John Doerr. It was actually a quote by Larry Page, who was one of the founders of Google, essentially suggesting that winning organizations need to put more wood behind fewer arrows. And that speaks to the need for prioritization, which is kind of the next big pillar that we want to talk about today.
Yeah, and prioritization of the goals, it's funny, we talked about before, like when you first start and you write these unbelievably complex business strategy, but you've really just got to focus on the 3 to 5 things that bring value to your business. And we're just talking about value just then. And when you start building those 3 to 5 things that bring value to it, how do you start building that incremental momentum that builds that consistency and consistency in habit, consistency, discipline across the business? And it's absolutely vital to focus on 3 to 5 things. We use the base camp of if you're climbing Mount Everest, you're making your way up Mount Everest. You're not just walking up Mount Everest. You're small. You're going from base camp 1 to base camp 2, base camp 3. Any sort of goal that you want to achieve, whether it's in business or in life. No one wakes up and goes, "I'm going to be a billionaire tomorrow," and 3 days later they're a billionaire. It's a case of incremental goals, and you're slowly making your way towards that goal, but have that vision and be able to sort of pivot where it need to be. So to be able to sort of prioritize what's actually important is very, very important. And that's hard to do when you're at a startup because you're wearing 47 hats. And it's really, really hard to do when you're a startup, when you're trying to launch a startup whilst managing your life and your career. Because a lot of the times with startups, it's like a side hustle initially to become your full-time hustle. And if you're wearing dad hat, father hat, employee hat, as well as founder hat, keeping that prioritization of your goals and the values of what you're trying to achieve in the business, it becomes absolute paramount to success to launch and paramount to success to actually get into the market and get in the game.
And so when you think about the prioritization side of things, Ash, what do you find is the best time horizon for a set of goals to be pegged towards? Is 3 months too short? Is a year too long? How do you find the goal setting framework to be best on a time horizon perspective?
It kind of really it will depend on what you're trying to achieve. I don't know, it sounds really sort of a wishy-washy answer, but if I look at, like, if you're launched and you want to get $1 million in sales over the next 2 years, going $1 million and just going straight to it, that's not going to get you there. But if you can break it down to incremental, go, okay, Q1, we're going to get 15,000, and Q3, we're going to have 25, 30,000. It really will depend on having that big goal initially, then start to break it down into sort of batch it into sort of achievable goals. Because once again, it's one of those things that as you work your way up the mountain, you find you're slowly just getting there and you're getting to where you need to go. But I think a good goal or a good objective should be challenging enough. So it's not just a layup, but it's got to be achievable. And that's kind of the balance sometimes. And that's where the old kissing a few frogs sort of scenario is. You got to try a few things and go, well, actually this works or this doesn't. I would say early days in your startup journey, just set yourself a few really simple goals and start getting that dopamine hit of getting wins. And we use the example of, don't go for the sugar hit that gets you up and then gets you down real quick. Looking for almost like low GI goals that are slow releasing, that will give you more benefit along the way. So yeah, the short answer to that, Lauren, it really will depend, but make it challenging, but make it also easy and challenging but achievable.
And I think that point around goals that will actually sustain beyond that initial hit is really critical. I think so often when we think about goals, they become the means or the means to the end in and of themselves. People are looking to hit a particular metric and that's the goal, but there's no sense of what that then like catapults too. So we're actually looking for these more sustainable, swinging through the trees and being able to grab the next vine as you go along, as opposed to taking that big swing. Maybe you make it, but it actually doesn't land you anywhere because there's a big chasm on the other side. So that seems to be like a really key insight to take away from this as well.
And it's relatable as well. Like, I mean, if you talk about people that go to the gym and you don't just walk in a stick and walk out looking like the Hulk. It's incremental wins and refined consistency. And the more you do that too, it's a really good lesson for just business in general. The more you're consistent, the more you're working towards a particular goal, that success will just slowly come your way, and then it starts to come at you quite quick. What's the line? The luckier, the more I train, the luckier I become. And same sort of thing with goals. The more you sort of working in a consistent manner and prioritizing what actually matters, and that's super important too, because you will get sidetracked so often on.
That's exactly. I think that's the kind of the flip side of prioritization, of course, is then being able to know what to say no to. And, yes, with every bit of increasing success, the opportunities will come and they will be broader and further than ever before. But without that constant recalibration back to your North Star and your own big rocks where what you feel compelled and excited to achieve and what your team has rallied around, if you don't continually close the loop between those new emerging opportunities and that kind of compass direction that you've set, you're going to find yourself distracted in all sorts of different directions.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And that's the big one. I've learned that from my own personal experience. I got sidetracked by just crazy stuff left, right, and center. And where I found I was at my best is when I turned around and go, does this actually matter? And does this actually move the needle? And does this allow me to get to my North Star quicker? Or is this a distraction? Using the GPS rule again, am I going down the wrong road? And to understand that, between the prioritization of the goals and everything else that we're discussing, you start getting those consistent behaviors. People talk about discipline, and sometimes discipline can be looked as a bad word. I would prefer consistency. How do you create those consistent behaviors that will allow you to sort of achieve?
And that really leads to, I guess, our fourth pillar of today. How complex do these goal planning processes have to be, and how complex does this plan have to look overall?
Yeah, and this is a real big one. I'll use the example of the 40-page business plan that I saw or heard of a couple of weeks back. And when things are over-engineered, you're never going to achieve it. It's just you've got to keep it simple, but there's a balance between keeping it simple and being too vague. Going, I want to get $1 million in sales. Very extraordinarily vague. And by the way, investors are going to say, next question is going to be, it's always the key in the follow-up. How are you going to do that? We're going to launch on Product Hunt. That's not the answer. So you've got to keep it really simple, but not over-engineer it. Like here, everything you commit to on paper deserves your full attention. So if you're committing to these goals, commit to the goals. But draw it back to simplicity. Don't sit there and make it overly complex. And it needs to tie back to your why. And I've spoken about this with you previously. The why has to really be important, and everything should go back to your values and to your vision, and that ties back to your why. So why are you actually doing it in the first place? Why have you founded this business? And it's not because you want to be Canva and be worth 55 billion. It's like, scratch that. Why is the reason? What is getting you up in the morning to do what you're doing and work 18-hour days and have the sleepless nights? Why are you doing this? Are you trying to solve a problem? Are you trying to make the world a better place? These are the things, and that should be your driver. And then once you do that, then go break it down once again into the prioritization and go, well, how do I simply get to that goal? And then once you start doing that, everything sort of starts to fall back into place. But if you don't know your why, it's going to be really, really hard to launch any business or have a sustainable business, because you're just doing it because you're not passionate about it. And in investors, staff members, board members, whoever wants to come on board are going to sense that. So to have a why and have a simple goal of what you're trying to achieve really resonates with people. And in your time at Startmate, sorry, Lauren, you would have seen a lot of fantastic whys.
Definitely, but I think it is a really easy trap to fall into, even at that stage where you've got your 3-month goal towards the end of the cohort, and the whys can tend to be what's going to be most impressive at demo day. And it really is this refocusing, like to your example before, you know, $1 million in revenue by the end of the year. Even that question, while it's an important metric from a financial standpoint, you know, you have to be able to articulate the why having $1 million in revenue is going to be so impactful for your business, because it allows you to extend growth of the product into a different direction. It allows you to unlock a new market. You know, having that the why has to go up and down the chain. It's not always about the why of your core purpose, although that is definitely the kind of, it all should roll up to that eventually, but it's the why this choice, why this decision, why this investment in these resources is going to affect the goal directly above it, and how that then, you know, leans into the big rock, which then of course helps you nail that North Star over time. So there's it's almost the concept of 5 whys is how I've heard it described. You just keep asking yourself why 5 times until you've gotten to the core of the nitty-gritty of the goal and the impact that you want it to have.
Yeah, and look, I'll talk about our why. Our why is my why is because I want businesses to put their head on the pillows every night. Business owners and founders put their head on the pillow every night and feel good about their business and feel good that they know where they're going. When I heard the stat that 51% of small to medium businesses cash flow negative, that scared the absolute crap out of me. I'm like, how do people put their head on the pillow? And if we play a small part in helping businesses launch and be profitable and keep on and be efficient, then that's my why. And if I make 1% difference, that's 1% difference that wasn't there before. So that's sort of our why. So I really challenge founders that I've spoken to at these days and nights, that if you're going to launch your product and you're going to launch a dating app, or you're going to launch a cryptocurrency or whatever you want to launch, why are you doing it? And that makes it that makes a hugely difference. And we talked about missionaries versus mercenaries before, and that's a really big element. So to understanding it. So and once you do that, figure out why you're doing it and keep it simple. Keep it absolutely simple.
That's it. So we've talked about, I guess, the compass point being your North Star, your more chunky projects, initiatives, big strategic pillars that are going to help you achieve that North Star. And then we've talked about the goals themselves that will lead towards those big rocks. And really what you're looking to map out with those goals is, you know, even to go back to that base camp analogy, it's where's that first port of shelter in your journey of a startup? What is the minimum that you can do to get to that inflection point that helps you swing for that next rope or move to that next base camp? And so you can start, I would say, Ash, I'd love your perspective on this. I feel like you can start at either end, as long as you're constantly zooming in and zooming out. You might have a vague sense of your North Star, but fleshing out your immediate next steps will help bring color to that North Star. But again, going back to our first point, that's why the active dynamic business planning is so much more critical than a static kind of Word document that you can't really flex and change over time.
Yeah, I can completely, no, 100%. That pinch and zoom of your business is absolutely vital. I'll use my own example. We've made pivots. We talked about from strategy to game planning. We've made pivots because we looked at it, we zoomed out, went, well, no, we're wrong. Zoom back in. What do we need to do to course correct this? And if we didn't make that decision, and if we didn't focus on simple steps to change that, and it's just honestly, it's just simple stuff like focusing on different markets and terminology, then we'd be in a very different place than we are now. So it's, without having that pinch and zoom available to you is super important. So what we'll do, I'll show you just quickly, just a bit of a case study of a typical startup that we work with. So that way people can understand what we're talking about in action. So here in Empiraa, you've got 4 pillars of most startups, and what it will be is that you want to build your platform, pretty important. You want funding requirements, paying for the platform, that's reasonably important as well. Financial plan. So from here, our sales and marketing. So how are you going to launch your product? And that's obviously, we're starting to build out what we're trying to achieve here, and then how do we operationalize the product. And having this one in particular is they're trying to launch a product, but they want to understand, okay, how are we going to raise our pre-seed round? And they can have a look here and they can go, well, we need to, little things, once again, breaking down small goals and looking at, like, we need to have all our documents ready for the raise. So getting, LawPath, Cake, these platforms along to actually help them along the way. Build out investor pipelines, refine the pitch deck, and then stress test the pitch deck and seek advice. And you can see that from here, it's making an incremental difference, and they're actually raising money because they've built a plan, they're executing the plan, and they're rolling that plan out. And by having these things here allows investors to feel more comfortable that, oh, actually, they know what they're doing. They've got a plan here, and they could show the investors what they want to do and where they're going, especially at an early stage. And definitely would love your input on this, Lauren, is at early stage, investors invest in 2 things, the person and the idea. And that's basically it, because you don't generally have a product at this stage.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I think where this planning piece becomes really important is the idea, as you've probably also the phrase of, the idea is nothing, execution is everything. I think what the planning helps you do in the absence of real traction is properly articulate how you intend to, enact, your vision, enact your idea to become something impactful. And if you can put a line in the sand and say, we know we need to do X, Y, Z by this time for this, for the ball to start rolling, it then gives them a point in time to come back and check, were you able to actualize the plan as you expected, or what did you learn through the process? Even if you didn't hit those goals, you've walked away with some intelligence about where your business needs to go now. So that's the critical part of the planning to the vision process, I think, that investors are looking to see.
Yeah.
So we might have time for questions. Yeah.
No. I was about to say the same thing, Lauren. Great minds.
Perfect. So I know we have one question in the Q&A. There's a couple of hands up that I can see, but perhaps if you have a question that you can pop it in the Q&A section, we will have a chance to chat about it there, or just pop it in the comments as well. So to talk through this question, rather than reading out the whole thing, I think that the point of this question here from Shane, thank you, Shane, for your question, is you're having lots of investor meetings. They all love the concept and the design of your app, but without revenue, it's hard to get investors. What's your advice on how to create more of a buzz for investors, or the best strategy to entice them without revenue coming in? Now, the answer that I have to this question may not be the one you want to hear, but given that this is the planning conversation, I think the biggest trap, and maybe this is a good example from my time at StartMate as well, the biggest mistake founders would make coming through the process is when we were going through the cohort planning process and they were setting their big rocks. So many of them would first put fundraising as one of their big rocks. Now, that's not to take away from the importance of fundraising and the huge time commitment it is. Like, certainly in terms of where your time is being spent, it will become, a sizable priority. However, if you think about your business in the way that's going to continue to give it momentum, if you can set goals that are going to continue to push you towards your North Star, the conversation with investors will be inherently easier, and it will build momentum in and of itself. So rather than putting your focus on goal setting around investors and how to, appeal to them and how to create buzz with them, what you really need to be doing is continuing to focus on the buzz that you can create for your customers around your product. Revenue may not be the first sign of life you see for your business, but if you have a plan for how to engage, increase that engagement, broaden that engagement with your customers, the rest of those, that's where the planning needs to come in, and the investor kind of interest takes care of itself to a point. Would you agree with that?
100%. every founder I've spoken to, especially early stage, have said the same thing: how do you get investors? And straight away, my response is, well, you're in the wrong business. And it sounds horrible and it sounds absolutely brutal, but what I'm trying to say to them is focus on your business and how is this investable, and but pull back even further, why would people pay for it? And why would people need it? And then once they start getting that and they understand, well, actually, I'm building this. So speak to your focus groups, get polls, do everything you need to do, not to build buzz, but to build an answer bank of why this product is required. And it doesn't matter. And one thing that sort of startups, a mistake startups will generally do sometimes is they'll go, oh, we need it because me and my mates thought we were at the pub and we thought, it's like, no. Just because you had a good idea, it's like the old analogy, just because I can drink doesn't mean I should buy a pub. and so in all honesty, build a business around it, build all your building blocks. And then, like Lauren said, then investors will come your way effectively, and they will start knocking. And fundraising's hard. I'm not going to lie; it's a very difficult thing. But if you're focused completely on just raising money and raising buzz for investors, then you're talking to the wrong audience.
Yeah, I mean, you had the kind of fundraising plan within your demo there, which makes a lot of sense when you get to the point that you're trying to map out the process to achieve that. But if fundraising, if it's have an idea, raise funding, if that's the order of events, there's probably a step in the middle missing to just sense check whether or not your business is anything that people are going to rally around in the first place. And investors will always ask for that at this point.
And by the way, best way to get investors is get a buzz around your product that aren't investors. Get people talking about your product. So
yeah, or the best way to get investors is to not need investors.
Yeah, well, that's true too.
That's the other way to think about
it. No, that's a good one. I've got a question from Brendan.
Brendan?
Yeah. So what's the biggest challenge executing your plan when developing and launching Empiraa? The biggest challenge was I needed Empiraa to launch my plan, but I was building Empiraa along the way. So it was a chicken and egg situation. Honestly, the hardest thing that I had to do was trying to justify why this product needed to exist. When people were using spreadsheets or Asana or Monday or Notion, and just keep bringing it back to the North Star. Why does this need to exist, and what do I want to achieve with it? But then understand the why. And that was probably the biggest challenge there, to get out the idea that's sitting in my head and the word vomit that used to come out of my mouth when talking about it, and to bring it in succinctly and be able to understand what the product was. And by the way, that takes time. That doesn't even happen straight away. That's as you get into market, guess who's going to tell you what your product is? Users, people that are actually there. And my investors are probably going to shoot me for this. Users are far more important to me than my investors, because they're the ones that the greatest way to fundraise is to get revenue. It's the greatest way to fundraise. So, but launching's really hard, was really hard because I was trying to go into a crowded space, and how do we make noise in that crowded space? And that was probably the hardest thing, especially developing as well, developing the product, because I'm a non-technical founder. I'm a product-led founder, as I've been called, and asking the questions consistently to developers. I can't be that hard, and realizing, yeah, that is hard.
I don't think the investors would hate that either. I think ultimately everyone's the strong message right now is optimize for a pathway to revenue. Yes, there are businesses where that's particularly complex, but I think everyone right now should be putting their attention towards what's the fastest way to build a sustainable business. And at the point that it's sustainable, we pour firepower on it with extra investment and things like that.
Yep.
So Tim's asked one more question in the chat there, which is almost a good way to kind of get towards a close for the session. I mean, The reality is, Tim, it is very challenging. I think that the key takeaway from this session is, well, there's probably a couple. First of all, maybe putting it down on paper is not the right place to put it, although that is my preference also. But the reality is that it needs to be an iterative and dynamic process. So you start with a framing for the North Star that feels like directionally correct. And then as Ash said, the pinch and zoom effect of, so if you were going to get there, what could be the long list of things you would do to achieve that North Star, and how would you determine, what you're uniquely placed to do, where you have a window of opportunity in the market. I think when you get to that big rocks layer, it's something that we could probably dive in on in a future session. We're going to look to do a live masterclass in March, so that could be part of the conversation. There is, figuring out your unique selling proposition in tandem with your big rocks is the best way to I guess, figure out the goals that sit below that in a way that's going to be compelling for you to build that North Star. And the goals themselves, again, once you've identified which are the big rocks you're most uniquely placed to tackle, that becomes the kind of pillars of your strategy. It's thinking about the most high impact, resource efficient, compelling and exciting ways to reach those big rocks through the goals that you identify. But giving people, including yourself, giving yourself and your team enough flexibility and freedom as to how they achieve those goals, that it's still interesting and exciting to be part of that startup journey. It's supposed to be ambiguous. It's supposed to be unclear, but the guardrails of your plan and your values for decision-making are what helps you kind of keep moving forward. But you'll be finding yourself going back over and over again and revisiting those goals and the vision overall time and time again.
And my big one, start. Just do it. And it is ambiguous, and this is why with Empiraa in particular, I tried to build a sandbox for planning, effectively allowing you to play and create things how you want them to be created. But I can't stress this enough to people. When you're doing this, have fun. This is a cool thing that you're doing, so have fun. So although it's challenging, don't let it beat you down. With some of the resources as well. In all honesty, the way the world's moved with ChatGPT and these type of products, if you've got something stuck in your head, and I've used this product, and I'm not sure you have as well, Lauren, but where you sit there and you go, and you just word vomit into it, and then you go, make it simple. And sometimes I go, that's scary how good that is. So just sometimes just word dumping into AI products that can actually come back as in a consultative approach can really give you some sort of like a really good landing point but yeah.
And if robots aren't your style, even just sharing with a friend or another founder is a good way to sense check, right? It's just about having that reflection back as to what makes sense and what's compelling. So I guess to wrap up, we just wanted to leave you with another piece of wisdom from somebody much smarter than us. It's really reflecting on this idea of, Ash mentioned it earlier, anything that makes it onto paper, onto screen is a commitment that you're making to your business. So try to be really judicious with what you're committing to and leave everything else to be a bit more free floating and ambiguous, so you can, make trade-offs in real time. But the reality is that each time you do make one of those commitments, you're letting go of another opportunity that might come your way. But people who plan well will leverage these qualities of honesty, intellectual honesty, discipline, and even just the bravery to go, this is not important anymore. Sunk cost fallacy will keep us doing things we've been doing over and over again. And it's sometimes worth drawing a line in the sand, because it will save you, money, time, energy, if you continue to invest on it moving forward. So focusing on everything is focusing on nothing. And the best way to start focusing on the core things is to really give yourself that time to sit down and plan and make that habit of revisiting it. So any final thoughts from you, Ash?
Just being courageous to let things go, and be able to not die on the sword. That's a really, really, really important thing for founders. You sometimes just got to go, I've got to let that go and focus on other things. So having that courage to do so. Don't be so arrogant, not in a bad way, but don't be arrogant that you're going to die with an idea, and when everything's showing you that idea is not the way to go. So no, that's good. Now on here too, there's a bit of commercial stuff because, Lauren's from AWS and I'm from Empiraa. So we definitely want to, a few little treats for everybody. So with Empiraa, you get 14 days free. With Empiraa, we'll actually load in a startup plan for you as well. So we've got a plan for startups to help you get started, because getting started is the hardest thing to do. So if you sign up, we'll actually load in your plan ready to go. So to help you kick you all on the way. And Lauren, do you want to touch on AWS startups?
Sure. So for those of you unfamiliar, the AWS Activate program is specifically designed to help startups get from 0 to 1 to 10 to 100 and beyond. The Activate credits themselves offer discounts off the cost of Amazon AWS services over up to the value of $100,000 US over the lifetime of a startup. So, you know, for your being on the call today and for your interest, essentially you've got access to the first $5,000 US of those credits. If you're starting to build an AWS, that will get you a good way into your journey in those early days. But more to the point, the AWS Activate portal is full of heaps more knowledge, templates, workshops and webinars on all kinds of topics, particularly to help you get from 0 to 1 on the tech side of your journey as well, if that's not your background. So definitely jump onto the AWS Activate console, and you can use that code for $5,000 Activate credits to get you started on your journey, thanks to Empiraa.
There we go. Free 14 days, free $5,000, and I think it's it's brilliant. So we just want to back businesses and help them become the best versions of themselves. That's basically why Lauren and I got together to have this conversation and to help out anyone who we can possibly help out. So that's I would say that's our why, wouldn't you say, Lauren?
Yeah, absolutely. We just want to make sure that you get where you need to get to as efficiently as possible, and here to answer questions on that front from today onwards.
So that seems as good as time as any. Thank you very much for everyone joining in on a nice Thursday lunchtime. Any other questions that you need, feel free to reach out to Lauren or myself, or either Twitter or LinkedIn or via email. And feel free to jump on Empiraa or AWS and take advantage of those fantastic offers that are there.
Thanks so much for joining, everyone, and we will have more of these sessions in the future.
Thanks, guys and girls.
Bye.